There is something deeply mysterious about silence. It has always been here, before words, before thought, before even the birth of sound. Long before any language was spoken, silence was the language of existence itself. And even now, beneath every word we utter, beneath every sound we hear, silence remains, vast, patient, eternal. When I began to study the nature of life, I realized that silence is not the absence of communication, it is the foundation of it. Every sound emerges from silence, and every sound eventually returns to it. Like waves rising from the ocean and falling back into it, words rise from silence and dissolve once they are spoken. The silence never disappears, it simply holds everything. Most people fear silence because it feels empty. They fill it with words, noise, distractions, because silence confronts them with something they cannot control. But that fear is the very sign that silence is sacred. For silence does not ask you to understand, it asks you to listen. It asks you to surrender the need to label, to explain, to define. Because the universe itself speaks in silence. When I sit quietly and simply observe, I notice that everything is communicating without words. The rustle of leaves, the rhythm of waves, the stillness of a mountain, they are not speaking to the mind, they are speaking to awareness. And awareness does not need language. It understands through presence. The universe does not shout its truth, it whispers it in stillness. It moves through the quiet intervals between thoughts, in the pause between one breath and the next. That is where I find it, not in ideas, not in concepts, but in the silent field of being that connects all things. When I was younger, I thought wisdom came from knowing more, from studying, reading, and collecting words. But over time, I discovered that the deepest truths cannot be said. They can only be lived, felt, and realized in the spaces where language falls away. Silence is not ignorance, it is understanding beyond the mind. Every spiritual tradition has pointed to this same truth. In Zen, they say the sound of one hand clapping is enlightenment. In Christianity, they speak of the still small voice of God. In Taoism, the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. All of them are pointing to the same mystery, that silence is the true language of the universe, and that everything else is only translation. The problem with words is that they divide. To name something is to separate it from what it is not. But existence is not divided, it is one continuous movement. When I speak, I cut a small piece from that infinite flow. When I am silent, I become aware of the whole. It is in silence that the mind stops grasping and the heart starts perceiving. Because the mind is noise, but the soul is silence. And only in silence can I hear what the mind cannot. The sound of the wind moving through the trees, the breath of the earth, the vibration of life itself, these are the true words of the universe. Sometimes, when I am surrounded by noise, I notice that silence never truly disappears. It is always there, underneath, like the canvas beneath a painting. Even when the colors are loud, the canvas holds them all. In the same way, silence holds every sound, every word, every moment. It is the space that allows existence to happen. We live in a world obsessed with saying, explaining, convincing. But the more we talk, the less we listen. And the less we listen, the more disconnected we become from the pulse of life. True communication does not require words, it requires awareness. When I look at a sunset, it does not speak, yet it tells me everything. When I sit beside the ocean, it says nothing, yet I feel understood. Silence is not empty, it is full of life. Every moment of stillness contains infinite potential. It is the womb from which creation arises. All great things begin in silence, the seed in the soil, the child in the womb, the idea before it takes form. The universe itself was born from a silent void, and into that silence it will one day return. The irony is that we often mistake silence for nothingness, when in truth, silence is everything. It is the invisible fabric of existence, the background of all being. The stars move in silence, the galaxies spin in silence, and within that silence, there is perfect order. Noise may create distraction, but silence creates meaning. When I truly listen to silence, I begin to sense that I am not separate from it. I am made of the same stillness that exists between stars. The same silence that lives beneath the sound of my own heartbeat. And in that realization, all the boundaries between myself and the world begin to dissolve. It is not that silence speaks to me, it is that I realize I am silence, expressing itself as sound for a little while. When I stop chasing words, I start hearing life itself. Every sound, every pause, becomes a part of a vast cosmic symphony that needs no conductor, no composer. Because it was never written, it is simply happening. Silence teaches me that understanding is not an achievement, it is a state of being. The more I rest in it, the clearer everything becomes. Not because I gain knowledge, but because I lose confusion. Silence doesn't add, it removes. It takes away the unnecessary until only truth remains. To be silent is to stop fighting with reality. It is to accept that existence does not need my commentary. The flower does not need me to describe it to be beautiful. The ocean does not need me to name its waves to be vast. Life is complete on its own. I am the one who forgot how to listen. When I remember, I find that silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of everything. And in that presence, I finally feel at home. The more I dwell in silence, the more I realize that it is not something I must create. It is already here, waiting beneath the surface of every sound, every thought, every breath. Silence does not need to be achieved, it needs to be remembered. And the remembering happens when I stop resisting what is. In a world that values noise as proof of existence, silence feels rebellious. People are afraid of it because it cannot be measured, sold, or performed. But silence has nothing to prove. It is content simply to be. And when I begin to rest in that same contentment, life starts to reveal its deeper patterns. I once believed that silence was the end of thought, but it is not the end, it is the background. Thoughts rise and fall within it like waves upon the sea. The problem is not thinking, it is believing that my thoughts define me. When I rest in silence, I see that I am not the wave, I am the ocean beneath it. The waves come and go, but the ocean remains. The mind wants to fill silence because it cannot stand the unknown. It wants to categorize, to control, to turn the infinite into something small enough to understand. But the universe does not fit into words, nor does it care to. The moment I try to define the mystery, I lose it. Silence invites me to stop trying and simply be with the vastness. In silence, I begin to sense a kind of order that is not logical but natural. A tree does not reason its way into blooming, it simply responds to the rhythm of life. The planets move, the tides shift, the seasons change, all without noise, all without resistance. That is the language of the universe, effortless alignment. When I become quiet inside, I start to align with that rhythm. I no longer need to push or force, I simply flow. Silence teaches me that life unfolds perfectly without my interference. It has been doing so long before I arrived, and it will continue long after I am gone. To trust this is to rediscover peace. There was a time when I sought silence only in isolation. I thought I had to escape the world to find it. But over time, I began to see that true silence is not around me, it is within me. Even in the middle of a crowded street, even in chaos, I can hear it. Because it is not the silence of sound, it is the silence of being. When I stop talking to myself in my head, the world becomes alive again. Colors seem brighter, sounds become music, movement becomes dance. It is not that the world has changed, but that my perception has become still enough to notice its beauty. The noise of my mind once drowned out the melody of existence. Now, in silence, I hear it everywhere. Silence is not passive. It is not lifeless or dull. It is the ground of creation itself. From silence, ideas are born, music begins, love speaks. Without silence, there can be no harmony, no understanding, no renewal. It is the womb of all things. When I look at the night sky, I feel this truth in my bones. The stars move in complete silence, yet their presence is overwhelming. They don't need to make noise to be magnificent. Their quiet radiance is enough. And I realize that perhaps my own life is meant to be lived that way, quietly radiant, without constant explanation. We spend so much of life trying to be heard, but what if true wisdom is learning how to listen? Not just to others, but to the silence that surrounds everything. Because in that silence, I can finally hear what life has been trying to tell me all along. The answers are not hidden, they are simply quieter than the questions. The greatest truths I have ever known did not come from words, but from moments when everything stopped. Moments when the mind surrendered and awareness opened like a window. That stillness is the meeting point between the personal and the eternal. It is where the universe and I are not two, but one. In silence, time disappears. The past and future lose their grip, and what remains is the eternal present, vast, full, complete. I can feel it when I breathe, when I listen, when I stop trying to be somewhere else. This moment is enough, because it is not a fragment of life, it is life itself. The universe speaks in this same way. Not with sentences or symbols, but with rhythm and presence. Everything that exists vibrates at its own frequency, and silence is the field that holds it all together. To listen to silence is to hear the heartbeat of existence. And when I truly listen, I find that the silence is not external, it is me. It is what remains when the noise of identity fades. It is the awareness behind every experience, the observer that never changes, the space in which all things appear and disappear. In this silence, I no longer need to know. I no longer need to search. Because the very act of listening becomes enough. Silence becomes communion, not with words, but with being. It is as if the entire universe is breathing with me, each inhale and exhale carrying an unspoken truth. This is why silence has always been the teacher of sages and mystics. It is not something to escape into, it is something to awaken to. Because in silence, I remember what I have always been, infinite, timeless, and whole. As I continue to rest in silence, something begins to dissolve, the boundary between myself and everything else. The more I listen, the less I find a listener. There is only awareness, vast and open, where sound and silence dance together. And in that dance, I see the truth. The universe is not speaking to me, it is speaking as me. Silence is not separate from sound. It is the space that makes sound possible. Without silence, there could be no music, no words, no laughter. Every note in a melody depends on the pauses between them. Every heartbeat arises from stillness. So it is not that silence opposes life, it gives life its meaning. I used to think that the purpose of silence was peace, but now I see it differently. Silence is not just calmness, it is truth. It doesn't offer comfort, it offers reality. When I am quiet enough, I see life exactly as it is, unfiltered, unjudged, unconditioned. And that clarity is more profound than any temporary calm. In silence, I begin to notice the intelligence of existence. The way the ocean breathes, the way the stars move, the way my own body lives without my control. There is a wisdom orchestrating all things, and it doesn't need words. It doesn't need my understanding, or my approval. It simply is. And so, I began to realize that the universe speaks in a language that cannot be translated. Its words are made of energy, movement, vibration, rhythm. Every gust of wind, every flicker of light, every heartbeat is part of that cosmic conversation. When I become silent, I can finally hear it, not with my ears, but with my being. This is what the mystics of every age have pointed toward. They called it different names, God, Tao, Brahmin, the Eternal, but the experience is the same. It is the recognition that the source of all sound, all life, all existence is silence. And in that recognition, separation dissolves. I am no longer a small self listening to the universe. I am the universe, listening to itself. Silence shows me that everything is connected, not through explanation, but through presence. It is not about learning, it is about remembering. Remembering that I am not a stranger in this vast cosmos. I am a reflection of it, an echo of the infinite silence that birthed the stars. When I return to silence, I return to home. It is not a place, not a destination, but a state of being where everything is whole. The worries, the identities, the noise, they fade like ripples returning to still water. What remains is awareness, simple and complete. There is a certain beauty in realizing that the most powerful language in existence says nothing at all. Because silence never argues, never divides, never lies. It is the only language that cannot be misunderstood. It doesn't belong to one culture or one faith, it belongs to everything. It speaks equally through the stars, the ocean, the heart, and the space between breaths. When I truly understand this, I stop chasing meaning in words and start feeling meaning in being. The tree, the sky, the light, all of them are saying the same thing through their stillness. They are saying, I am. And that is enough. In the end, silence becomes my teacher, my friend, my home. It teaches me that understanding does not come from thinking, but from listening. It shows me that peace is not found by controlling life, but by aligning with it. It reminds me that everything I seek outside is already speaking to me through stillness. Sometimes, I close my eyes and simply breathe. And in that breath, I feel the rhythm of the cosmos, expansion and contraction, birth and death, sound and silence. This is the eternal conversation of life. It never began and it will never end. It is the song of existence, and silence is its source. When I open my eyes again, nothing has changed, and yet everything has. The same world remains, but now I see it differently. I no longer need it to make sense. I simply let it be. Because in every sound, I now hear the silence behind it. In every moment, I sense the infinite presence that holds it all. To live in this way is to live in harmony with the universe. It is to move as the wind moves, to rest as the stars rest, to speak only when the words grow from stillness. Every action becomes sacred, every pause divine. Because when silence is within me, everything becomes music. And so, I understand now, silence was never the absence of life. It was the pulse of life itself, the heartbeat of creation, the language that never needed translation. To hear it is to awaken. To become it is to be free. The universe has always been speaking in silence. I just had to become quiet enough to listen.